welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama. Take it away again, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. As we've mentioned, the World Bank's 17th Annual Conference on Land and Poverty taking place this week in Washington, D.C. highlights the theme of scaling up responsible land governance. And as we speak, participants are discussing what can be done to guarantee inclusiveness, sustainability, and capacity building, which leads us to our question of the week, asking, what matters to you at the World Bank Conference on Land and Poverty? Well, before we begin, I'd like to thank you for using all our social media platform to communicate to us. And another reminder that we are indeed tweeting live today. Use the hashtag VOA World Bank Conference. If you haven't yet, do follow us on Twitter at VOA Shaka. Speaking of it, let's go to a tweet from Emmanuel Kachele, who tweeted, I support poverty eradication, all the same with Europe and America taking our riches by injudicious means. Well, that was Emmanuel Kachele. We'll go to another tweet from Jason Mansour in Uganda, who writes, there is a need to give equal rights to all when it comes to ownership of land, which women in Africa traditionally don't. Well, let's now turn to our Facebook fans and go to Adam Sawale from Tamale in Ghana, who writes, how is the World Bank and the IMF in particular able to reconcile the purpose of this conference and the popular accusations about their role in the impoverishment of African countries? And that through their paternalistic policies. It is a very interesting question. I would say your take, guys.
Very interesting. It's all yours, Saliou.
Well, I liked some of those comments, but all I can say as far as land matrix is concerned, we monitor the land investment all over the global south, particularly in Africa. And of course, when we look at the number of deals in Africa, we have around 480 deals in Africa, which cover an area of 24 million hectares. And of course, the main target areas are South Sudan, Sudan, DRC, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Ghana. And the main investors come from UK,
what about Kenya?
USA. Yeah, Kenya is also a targeted country.
Tanzania?
As well as
Uganda?
I mean, of course. All those, I'm just giving you the top most targeted countries.
What about your motherland, Senegal?
Indeed, we have some few issues there in Senegal, having countries like deals with issues with Italy, Italian investors. I mean, it's all over the country. I mean, Africa is the most targeted continent. There's no doubt about it, and it's known.
Okay. Let's go to, well, it's again, it's all for you again, Mariama.
Yes, we'll go to a comment from Kazarwa Seth in Kampala, Uganda, who writes that African countries are poor because of selfish interest in African leaders. They want to overstay in power, which has left Africa without much change and created corruption in African countries. Most of the time, election leaders invest a lot in bribing people to vote in their favor, hence misusing government funds. Another Facebook comment comes from Nolan Kabwe in Zambia, and he writes that some of these issues need to be discussed today because many Africans are suffering due to high poverty level, and for land, Africans need to settle property with their families. Shaka, again, and guest, your take on these comments.
Well, your reaction, Reverend Okule.
Yes, you know, the issue of bad governance that keeps coming up is absolutely true. You know, Africa has vast amount of resources, fertile land, minerals, name it, a very favorable weather, no major earthquake. So it's one of the most stable continents on earth. and in fact one of the richest. But people are living in poverty conditions unimaginable because, one, the selfishness that this past commentator made, the selfishness of a few people, the corruption, and the short-sightedness of some of the leaders who are readily mortgaging their whole future and the future of generations to come for immediate gains, for a bowl of soup, if you would, for caviar, whatever they are gaining from it. So that needs to be addressed. But another of the commentators talking about that Africa are looking at the World Bank and IMFs with suspect because of history. If you look at some of the structural adjustment programs across the continent, from Nigeria to, through to the Far East of the continent, structural adjustment program recommended by IMF have ended up impoverishing most of those continents and most of those countries. So there is a suspicion out there on the continent about the activities, the role IMF and World Bank is playing in continuing to impoverish it.
The Bretton Woods institutions.
The institutions that have links to former colonial masters. So there is a suspicion there. So it is actually a good time for IMF and the World Bank to redeem its image, if they want to stay clear of it, to redeem its image by consulting the people, by finding out what kind of investment do people want, not what the investor wants. What kind of food are people wanting? Because most of these land grabs, they plant food that end up being exported to the investors' countries. So the people on the land get doubly deprived. So that's the problem there.
Very interesting. Well, thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
Well, it's interesting that the Reverend mentioned the structural adjustment policies. I definitely grew up during that time, and I remember them. I can't forget about those structural adjustment policies. But I also have a lot of friends who work at the World Bank, a lot of Africans, and every time I bring up the structural adjustment policies, their response is that it's a new World Bank, it's a new IMF, so I do want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And as you said, maybe the World Bank and IMF need to do some work to try to maybe change that kind of idea that some of us old folks have about those institutions. Well, that will do it for today's social media segment. Just a reminder that we appreciate all the feedback, whether it's in social media form or using other means to communicate to us.